AstroAccess, May 11, 2024. Automated light signaling, a visual warning for gravity changes on parabolic flights. Brenda Williamson.
There we go. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking to you all about today is an experiment that I have gotten the incredible honor to fly this May on a zero-gravity flight with AstroAccess's partner organization, the Aurelia Institute. So before I talk about what I have done, I'm going to give you all a bit of an overview about the history of this project and how AstroAccess has done similar experiments in the past. But before I get into that, I'd like to take a moment to remember a very important person to AstroAccess and to the entire industry, Apurva Varia, who unfortunately passed away last month. He was part of AstroAccess's inaugural flight in 2021 and has been an incredible integral part of the AstroAccess team ever since. And he actually originally conceived the experiment that I've worked on furthering for the deaf and hard of hearing crew for AstroAccess. So it's a very sad loss, but he will be missed. Thank you. So a bit about me. My name is Brenda Williamson. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white female with long brown hair, and today I'm wearing my very own AstroAccess polo with the logo in the front left corner. I recently, last June, graduated from the University of California, San Diego with a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering. I was brought on board to be the AstroAccess Director of Logistics in April of 2021, and I recently stepped down from that position in February of this year. So I've been involved with some kind of accessibility and disability advocacy since 2013. I started in accessible dance, moved into accessible horseback riding, and then space travel. So a natural progression, if you ask me. So this image here is me standing below the huge boosters of a display in front of the Johnson Space Center. I'm just a tiny little person at the bottom of that frame underneath the huge rocket boosters. So pulling in, my project pulls in different aspects of my career, I guess you could say. First and foremost, the flight I'll be doing this May is chartered by the Aurelia Institute and working with Zero G, of course, who has the plane. I was given a seat along with another co-flyer by AstroAccess. And on top of all of that, I was given special permission to do this experiment for my aerospace senior design project when I graduated last June. So pulling in multiple different pieces. And the whole thing is generously sponsored financially by the Arthur C. Clarke Center for Human Imagination at UCSB. So in case you didn't know, a parabolic flight involves flying a plane in a parabolic trajectory. And on the descent, you feel weightless. You have a feeling of free fall as the plane descends very quickly at a 45-degree angle. And through this flight, you can achieve different types of gravity. Martian gravity, which is 3/8 of Earth's gravity, lunar gravity, which is 1/6 of Earth's, and zero, or more correctly, microgravity, which is 0 G's, or no gravity. It's really free fall, but we call it microgravity. It simulates a microgravity environment. So over the course of this flight, I will personally be doing 20 parabolas, 2 Martian, 2 lunar, and the rest are 0 G. And we alternate very quickly between the two, so it's kind of exhausting. But this flight, these type of flights, are very important for astronaut training and microgravity research of all kinds. So a bit of backstory to this entire concept of the light signaling was the design of the light signaling experiment by Apurva Varia, who I mentioned before, which involves manual lighting beacons for signaling gravity changes to our deaf and hard of hearing crew. So this light system has been flown on pretty much every AstroAccess flight to date, and it's used in conjunction with the verbal call out that the Zero G coaches use to tell everyone when the parabola is going to change and end and go into the pull-up maneuver and into the next parabola, which, as I said before, is always changing. So there's always communication happening in the cabin. But this communication is mainly verbal, which is not accessible to the deaf crew. So Apurva's idea was a system of LED lights controlled manually using a Bluetooth connection and a smartphone app to change the lights using red to signal hypergravity, blue to signal steady level flight, and green to signal microgravity. And these pictures on the right show two different versions of the manual experiment that have been flown. The one on the top left is a long, thin string of LEDs contained in a clear tube. There you can see a perva kind of bouncing off the back wall, floating in zero G. And the bottom right is another iteration of it using LED floodlights, which attach to the floor and kind of fill the space with ambient light instead of just a string. So that system worked great, and it was proven to be beneficial not only by the deaf and hard of hearing crew, but by almost everyone on the plane. Having a visual cue is really beneficial when it's loud and everyone's yelling in this cabin. So not only the deaf and hard of hearing crew benefited from it, and as I mentioned before, it's very loud in there, everyone's yelling. So the lights were very helpful, especially when you're focused on a task, as everyone was. But the manual version involved giving the phone to a zero G coach to press a button to change the lights as they called out, which is fine, but the zero G coaches have enough to do. So the question became, can we automate the system and somehow tie it to the motion of the plane itself so that no one has to manually change the lights? So the problem definition here became, can we provide enough advanced warning, just like the zero G coaches would do with these automated lights? Can we get them somehow in sync with the call out? Or maybe just a little bit earlier would also be cool, but no false positives, meaning if it's not zero G, they should not turn green, and give enough ambient lighting to be seen from pretty much every angle. So these are the constraints going into this automated version, which is what I'm going to be testing this May. So how does this work? How do you automate a gravity change LED signaling system? So I've started here by throwing together a kind of a prototype, which is basically the final thing. It's a piece of plywood with all kinds of circuitry run by an Arduino Uno processor with an accelerometer attached to it that recognizes the Z-axis or the downward acceleration of the plane, which is the direction that our zero G occurs in the Z-axis. It has a real-time clock module to help me timestamp and collect data, and an SD card also to store data for me to analyze later. It has a long string of LED lights rather than the floodlight method. This was just easier for me to hardwire into the system, and a control panel for manual control to help me test, troubleshoot, and control things manually for demonstration or backup purposes. But what's great about this is it's automated and it requires fewer crew members to operate than manual. We don't have to give this to a coach. It's kind of a set it and forget it thing. It's very accessible using universal design and the best practices we learned from the manual version. We know that the lights are good and this continues that. It's flexible to different profiles, meaning it can recognize not just zero gravity, but also Martian and lunar. And on top of all of that, it can collect data using a mounted GoPro, which is not pictured in this image of the wooden board, but it will have a GoPro to collect data as well. So success for this system means that the lights will be blue for steady level flight, red for hyperg, which is the pull-up maneuver of the plane, and green for all three types of lower Gs, Martian, lunar, and zero, on the descent before transitioning back to red and back and forth. So that's what success will look like for this system. So as I hinted at before, some structures here. The whole thing is made out of wooden press board because that's the materials I had lying around. Lots of screws and Velcro straps to hold everything down in the microgravity environment. It's about 10 pounds, half of which is the backup battery, which is very heavy. It's 10 inches by 16 inches by 3 inches tall. So it's a kind of a laptop sized thing, but a little bit taller. And all the materials on board are just under $100. So not pictured here again is that heavy backup battery, the mounting stick for the GoPro, and I also laser cut an acrylic cover for the circuit to keep wires from coming loose and to protect it from damage from above. So narrowing down to one of the subsystems here is the Arduino Uno circuit, which is comprised of an Arduino Uno board as the processor, 3-axis accelerometer, the SD card, and the real-time clock. So the code recognizes the downward Z-axis acceleration. It also features 3 smaller LED bulbs, so I can troubleshoot and also turn off the big lights if it's just too bright and I don't want them on all the time, which is kind of a cool feature. And the acceleration, time, and different statuses will be printed to the SD card in a spreadsheet format. So that's all the code and stuff going on to run this thing. So zooming in quickly to another subsystem is the control panel, which just helps me switch to different modes for testing. There's 3 buttons for manual control, which I won't be using on the flight, but they've been great to have for demonstration purposes, with 3 big red buttons, each about a dime size, and 3 stiff silver switches. One of them controls the light strip to just turn it on and off. One is just a mechanical connection to the LED lights to help me troubleshoot the lights. That way it separates it from a code issue and can help me make sure that all the light connections are good. And the 3rd button, which switches between manual and automatic mode. Of course, for the flight, it'll be in automatic mode, which is very exciting. So another cool thing about this experiment is it can use 2 different power sources. It can be plugged into just the standard wall outlet, which are provided along the floor of the plane. And it also has a backup battery in case we lose power on the plane for some reason, which is highly unlikely, but it's kind of cool to have a backup battery nonetheless. And that can just be turned on with a simple switch. And here is just a schematic of how all those voltages work. The wall outlet will go into a 12-volt power strip for the lights, and then another plug that came with the Arduino for 9 volts. The battery as well has a voltage converter because the battery itself is 12, which can help the lights, and the converter brings it down to 9 volts for the Arduino. So 2 different kinds of power that can power both the LED lights and the Arduino board itself. So speaking of the lights, I have a very long strip, very thin strip of LED lights with a bunch of tiny little bulbs all along it, these flat LED bulbs. The whole strip is 16.4 feet, which is just a little bit longer than the width of the cabin floor. So the plan is to install these on the floor width-wise so that me and my co-flyer have our little lane that has the lights on the floor there so that we can see them and try not to affect the other experiments in our vicinity. The light strip has a quick disconnect for storage and replacement. If they are to get damaged during the flight, they can be swapped out, and I'll have a spare strip with me, so it's not soldered directly to the thing. It can actually have a quick removal in case something happens. So that's very convenient for all kinds of reasons. Unfortunately, this light strip is not individually addressable, meaning if one bulb is one color, all the bulbs have to be the same color. In the future, there is maybe an idea of doing kind of a pulsing light for more visual interest and visual cues. Maybe they can go down to the floor for hyper-G to kind of indicate to everyone to go down, something like that. But for now, it's just a static color. So in a nutshell, the Arduino code is about 1,000 lines of code. I'll skip all these gory details, but there's 4 major if-else statements that connect to the states of the switches that I talked about before on the control panel. There's 17 if-else statements controlling the logic of the automated mode, meaning it can recognize when it's hypergravity for Martian, hypergravity going into lunar, hypergravity going into 0. There's actually distinct signatures that I've noticed in past acceleration data collected from other flights that I've coded into this system. So you can also kind of tune the sensitivity of all the variables to tighten or loosen the advanced notice. So for example, since 0G kind of has a range, it's kind of bumpy, I can set different ranges, and I'll get into what that means here in a second. It basically just controls the sensitivity of the accelerometer. So the whole thing is controlled by acceleration values, time durations, and what I'm calling state flags, which just tell the code what kind of parabola it's just been through to help predict where it's going to be. So one of the ways to test this, it's actually very difficult to test this, but one of the ways that I came up with is a wooden pendulum. It was about 5 feet long that I set up in my garage to swing, and I put my board at the bottom of it and wound the lights up the center pole of this pendulum. Basically, it's really hard to simulate a zero gravity environment. I mean, if it was easy, then 0G would be out of a job. So the idea was to use this pendulum to just get a feel for transitioning between different acceleration states to help me just kind of learn how I'm going to set up the code and some of the logic that I might need. One of the problems is it's way too quick. You only get microgravity right at that moment where the pendulum is pausing, and that's only like half a second, as opposed to the 20 seconds that the actual plane can do. But it helped me get a feel for what I was doing. So another way for ground testing, I inputted different vectors of real flight data, used that instead of an accelerometer to generate some cool graphs. So these graphs here, at the top, there's a red zone for the high acceleration values. In the middle, there's a thin strip of blue representing level flight. And at the bottom, in the 0 range, is a thin strip of green. And these zones, as I said, correspond to the acceleration values. And here on these graphs are a series of dots, each with their own color. And on the left, you can see that the green dots mean, or the dot color represents the color of the lights. So on the left, the green dots are in the green zone. And the moment that the line leaves the green zone, the dots turn red, which is great. That's exactly what we want. And this is generated by running old acceleration data through the code as if that old data were the accelerometer values. So on the left here in the blue zone, the red or the dots are still red, which is great. That means that the code ignored that level flight because it happened too quickly. And we didn't settle in the level flight range enough for the lights to turn blue. So that's where those acceleration variables and the time variables come in. Then on the right, similar story, except on this one, there are a few red lights in the green zone as we leave hypergravity and go into microgravity, which means that it's not going to instantly turn green because we want to really make sure that we're in that green zone before we change the colors to avoid false positives. So another feature is bump avoidance, as I hinted at before. If the acceleration values don't stay in a certain range for a long enough time, which I can program and tune using those time variables, the lights won't change color. They have to really earn, quote unquote, their time in a zone for the lights to change color. So this is also very important because the accelerometer is so sensitive that if it just, the plane's own turbulence will cause the lights to just change color all over the place. So the time durations are important to avoid that from happening. Another way to test it that didn't fully get completed is a centrifuge that the Arthur C. Clarke Center, who's fiscally sponsoring my flight, has built. And it can do all kinds of Gs, 1 to 10 Gs on small payloads, and it spins really fast. And that could be one way to test the system as well without having an actual plane. So the really important thing here is data collection. Even if the lights don't work, this will be the way for me to tell what I need to change and fix in the future. So I will be taking GoPro video and audio to compare the lights changing with the actual verbal call out. And I'll have the Excel spreadsheet, which will log the actual accelerations as they're occurring, as well as what part of the code turned on at what time, so I can troubleshoot to see what might have gone wrong and which lights turned on when, and maybe see how I can fix that. So overall, this is quite a complex engineering problem, if I do say so myself. I have been working on this for the past year because the flight was supposed to be May of last year, but it was actually pushed to May of this year. So I've been sitting on this for about a year, which is definitely nerve-wracking. But overall, this system of visual lighting is not encompassed by current zero-G standards. As I said before, they just do verbal call-out, and they themselves don't have a standard method of communicating visually rather than audibly. So the goal of this experiment is to help future deaf and hard of hearing astronauts and brings in all kinds of disciplines, especially human factors and universal design. So, of course, I mean, as we all kind of know, since we're all here for the SciAccess conference, accessibility in the workplace is just a good thing. Accessible workplaces are higher performing, and they studies show that they bring in over twice the net income of their inaccessible peers. So making the parabolic flights more accessible through these lights is just one way to make the entire space industry and this important aspect of astronaut training more accessible. So for this flight in May, my main goal is just to collect that data. It would be great if these lights work, but it's the first time that they're going to fly. So there's just no guarantee that it's going to work as expected. That's just how things go. But at the very least, with my SD card and the GoPro, I will have never before seen data on the direct correlation between the zero-G callout and the actual acceleration of the plane, which is pretty important because it's hard to read the pilot's mind. And usually the pilot would have a direct line of communication with the zero-G flight directors, but we're going to see if there is a pattern and some kind of connection to how they do that call out for us to see if automating is at all possible. So thank you. I know that was a lot and it was kind of quick, but I think now is the time for questions. And while we do the questions, I'd like to give some credit to the people who helped me with this. AstroAccess, of course, Apurva, Larry Guterman, who's my co-flyer, Dr. Eric Veary from the Arthur C. Clarke Center, and some friends and relatives who helped me with the hardware and the software and general consulting on this. So I don't know if I should stop screen sharing for the questions or just kind of leave the credits here. But yeah, I think the time is the Q&A. So
if you have any contact information that you would like to share either on screen or in the chat, I would love for you to share that. But generally, just thank you so much for this presentation, Brenda. It has been so exciting to see this work develop. As many of you probably know or may want to know, AstroAccess is a Sci-Access program. So we have been very excited for this talk and very excited to see Brenda's work develop over the past year. If anyone has any questions, please use the Q&A function. You can find it using the bar that will either be at the bottom or the top of your screen, depending on what device you are on. But generally, Brenda, what are you most excited about for this upcoming flight?
Oh, thank you. Okay, yeah, great question. Well, it has been a long time coming. So I'm kind of excited for it to just happen because it's been rescheduled like 3 different times. It was supposed to be my graduating project last year, but I still got to do the experiment for my project, but it just didn't have that flight to talk about, which is kind of unfortunate. But I'm just really excited that it's actually happening. It's just really kind of a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and it's just a really cool thing to be able to do. Yeah, and in terms of sharing my contact information, it looks like the chat I have is only to hosts and panelists, which I don't think is super helpful to everyone. I'd love to drop my
change
email
that really
there.
quick. You should now be able to send to everyone.
There we go. Thank you. So I'll just put my personal email in the chat. And
do you have one question?
Yeah.
Assuming either the LED lights work or you're able to use the data to fix the design for the future if they do encounter any issues, what are the next steps you are expecting for this project?
Great question. So the big dream back in the day when I first came up with this idea, along with Apurva and Sherry Wells Jensen from AstroAccess, the goal that I had in my head was to give AstroAccess this nice little box with a string of lights and just say, hey, install this on the plane and you're good to go. And the lights will do their thing and they're going to be automated and it's going to be great. You don't have to do the smartphone thing anymore. But that takes a lot of hardware and coding expertise that I just don't have and don't really have the time for right now as I enter into the industry after graduation. But the new goal is to have that good correlation data to give to AstroAccess, whether or not it's actual footage of the lights working or a kind of a statement from Larry, who's hard of hearing himself, that the lights were beneficial, but really just saying, hey, this is the pattern I've noticed at this acceleration value, these lights will turn green, and that's what you need to know if you want to do the really refined hardware in the future. So the goal is to say, yes, this is possible. Hopefully it is. The data will tell. If the lights don't work, the data will tell me if it's possible or not. And just give to AstroAccess and their future researchers and say, hey, this is what you have to do to make this work. My job here is done. So hopefully this becomes a staple thing for AstroAccess to use forever. And one day maybe Zero-G will have a new aircraft with the lights built in. That would be really cool, actually. But this will show if that's even feasible and worth their time. So that's what I'm hoping to get out of the flight.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Another question from Gayla. In your opinion, what are the current challenges for space travel for astronauts with disabilities?
Wow, that's a question. Yeah, that is the question. I don't know if I'm the most qualified person to talk about all of that. Basically, everyone else at AstroAccess can answer that better than me, I think. Um, but I think really it's from my experience and the things I've learned volunteering with AstroAccess for the past couple of years, it's getting people in the industry aware that there is a problem and make them realize that the solutions to including everyone in space travel are feasible and probably not as complicated as they think it is. Just getting someone in the room, getting the right disabled voices in the room I think, would go leaps and bounds to making space travel more accessible. So I hope that answers the question. But basically, ask anyone else in AstroAccess and they can talk more about that better than I can. But thank you for your question.
SciAccess. Learn more at www.sciaccess.org.